The temperature outside Fredericton had been sitting below -20 for 3 days straight, and inside the small apartment on Brunswick Street, the radiator in the corner made a sound like a man clearing his throat every 10 minutes but gave almost no heat. Lena Marsh was 38 years old, and she was standing at the kitchen counter at 7 in the morning counting coins. Not bills. Coins. There were a few toonies, some loonies, a handful of quarters she'd pulled from the bottom of her winter coat pocket, and one dime she'd found wedged under the couch cushion the night before. She lined them up carefully on the laminate counter, the way her son had once lined up his toy trucks, smallest to largest, neat and purposeful. When she added it all up, she had $14.60. $14.60. That was it. That was everything. Behind her, from the back bedroom, she could hear Noah moving around. He was 7, and he woke up the same way every morning. Not gradually, but all at once, like a light being switched on. She heard his feet hit the floor, heard the small thump of him sliding off the bed he'd gotten too big for, and then the familiar shuffle of his socked feet along the hallway. "Mom. Morning, bud." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing his dinosaur pajamas, the ones with the worn-out knees, his dark hair still pressed flat on one side from sleep. He looked at the coins on the counter with the uncomplicated curiosity of a 7-year-old and didn't ask anything about them. He just walked to the fridge and opened it. She watched him stare into it. "Can we have eggs?" he asked. "We're out of eggs. Cereal? There's a little bit left. Just enough for you." He thought about this seriously, the way he thought about most things. Then he said, "You can have some too, Mom. I don't mind." Lena turned back to the coins and breathed slowly through her nose. Her shift at the laundry service on King Street didn't start until noon, and her pay wasn't coming until Friday. Today was Wednesday. She'd already borrowed $20 from her coworker Patricia last week, and had sworn to herself she wouldn't ask again. She'd been stretching the groceries since Saturday. A bag of rice, half a block of cheddar, some pasta, a can of tomatoes. Last night she'd made the last of the pasta and given Noah the bigger portion, telling him she wasn't very hungry, which wasn't true at all. She hadn't told anyone how bad this month had gotten. Her mother was in Moncton and didn't know. Her sister was dealing with her own things. Her friends, the few she still had time to see, knew she was tight on money the way everyone knew things about each other. In that vague, unasked way. But nobody knew it was this tight. Nobody knew she was counting coins on a Wednesday morning in January, trying to figure out how to feed her kid for 2 more days. Noah's father had left when Noah was 18 months old. It hadn't been dramatic. No screaming fights, no door slamming. He'd just become someone who was there and then wasn't. He sent birthday cards sometimes. He was 4 provinces away now and had a new life that didn't really have room in it for the one he'd left behind. So it was just Lena. Just the two of them on Brunswick Street. She poured the last of the cereal into a bowl for Noah and set it on the table with what was left of the milk, which wasn't much. She had a glass of water with a piece of bread she toasted twice to make it feel like more than it was. "Are you sure you don't want some?" Noah asked, looking at her across the table. "I'm good," she said. "Eat up. School in 40 minutes. He ate. She watched him eat, and she smiled when he looked up at her, and when he looked back down at his bowl, she let the smile drop and stared out the window at the white and gray of the January street. After she walked Noah to the bus stop and watched the bus pull away, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than she needed to. The cold got into the collar of her coat. She had a few hours before her shift. She needed to figure out dinner. She needed to figure out the next 2 days, and she had $14.60. There was a grocery store 6 blocks away, a medium-sized place on the main stretch called Harlow's that she'd been going to since she'd moved to this part of the city 3 years ago. She knew which aisles to avoid when she was short on money. She knew which brands were cheaper, and which ones tasted close enough to the expensive ones that Noah wouldn't notice. She pulled her toque down over her ears and started walking. The cold on Fredericton streets in January had a particular quality to it, dry and still, so clear it almost had a sound. Her boots squeaked against the packed snow on the sidewalk. The city moved quietly around her, the way it always did in deep winter. A few cars. A woman walking a dog in a small orange jacket. The smell of wood smoke from somewhere. Inside Harlow's the warmth hit her immediately and she unwound her scarf a little. She took a basket instead of a cart and moved slowly, methodically. A bag of lentils, a small thing of oats, 2 apples that were slightly past their best but marked down, a carton of eggs, the smallest size, a can of chickpeas. She checked the price of everything and held a running total in her head, the way she'd learned to do, the way she hated doing. She was standing in the bread aisle trying to decide between 2 loaves. One was $1 cheaper but half the size. When she heard someone beside her say, The sourdough one is better if it helps. But the other one makes better toast. She glanced sideways. The man was somewhere in his mid-50s, with a gray beard and the particular kind of unhurried presence that some older men had. He was wearing a heavy canvas jacket, the kind with flannel lining, and he was holding a single loaf of rye bread, and apparently had no other shopping to do. Sorry, he said, noticing her expression. I worked in a bakery for about 15 years. Old habit. I can tell a lot about bread. Despite herself, Lena almost smiled. Which one's more filling, the big one? He said, without hesitation. She put the bigger loaf in her basket. The man, she'd learn later, his name was Walter Greer. Didn't say anything else right away. He seemed to be in no particular hurry. He walked alongside her to the end of the aisle with the ease of someone who'd wandered into the same space and happened to be going in the same direction. At the dairy section, she stood for a long moment looking at the butter and decided against it. She picked up a small carton of milk. She did the math in her head again. She was at about $12. She needed to leave herself enough for the bus tomorrow. In the next aisle, Noah had asked her that morning, just as she was buttoning up his coat at the door, whether they could have soup for dinner. Not anything specific, just soup. He'd said it quietly, the way he said things when he was being careful not to ask for too much. She found a can of lentil soup. It was $2.19 cent. She put it in the basket and kept moving. She didn't see Walter Greer again until she was at the checkout. There were 2 lanes open, and she got in the shorter one. She put her items on the belt, one by one, and watched the total climb on the small screen. The cashier was a teenager named Alicia, who worked weekend shifts and the occasional weekday, and scanned things with the automatic speed of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Lena watched the number, $7.40, $9, $13. She had $60 in her pocket. She was going to be fine. She exhaled slowly. Then she saw the problem. The oats had scanned wrong. The shelf price had said $2.99, but they were ringing through at $4.49. She knew because she'd read the tag twice. Excuse me, Lena said quietly. I think the oats rang up wrong. The tag said $2.99. Alicia stopped scanning and looked at the screen. I'll have to call for a price check. It might take a minute. Okay, Lena said. The woman behind her in line, early 60s, coat with faux fur on the collar, shifted, slightly, not rudely. Just the small impatient movement of someone who had other things to get to. The price check took 4 minutes. 4 minutes where Lena stood at the end of the belt with her hands folded over her basket and her heart doing the stupid, humiliating thing it did in situations like this, where the whole world seemed to narrow down to one small bright point of embarrassment. The oats came back as $2.99 cents. Alicia corrected it and continued scanning. The final total was $13.85. Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the coins, which she'd put into a small Ziploc bag to keep organized. She started counting them out on the counter. Alicia waited. The woman behind her waited. Lena did not look up. She counted out $13 in coins, which left her 85 cents short. She went through her pockets again. She checked the small inside pocket of her coat. She already knew there was nothing there, but she checked anyway because the body does that. It keeps looking even when the mind knows. 85 cents. She looked at her basket, the can of soup, the one her son had asked for quietly, on his way out the door. I'm going to take the soup off, she said. She said it calmly, the way she said everything when she was in public. Steady voice. Controlled face. She'd gotten very good at this. She reached for the can. Don't. It was Walter Greer. He'd come up behind her. She hadn't heard him, and he set his single loaf of rye bread down on the belt and looked at the cashier and said, Add it back, I've got the difference. Lena looked at him. It's 85 cents, he said. Come on. I can't let you. You can, he said. He had a plain, unworried manner. Not the performed generosity of someone who wanted to be noticed doing a good thing. More like someone who'd seen a small problem and had the means to fix it and saw no reason not to. Happens to everyone, he added simply. Alicia looked between them. Lena didn't move. Soup stays, Walter said to the cashier, and handed over a toonie. Lena stood very still for a moment. Then she put the coins down and finished paying for her groceries. Thank you, she said, once her bags were packed. She meant it, but the words felt too small and she didn't know what else to add. Roads are icy, Walter said, which seemed to mean, it's nothing, be careful going home. She walked out of the store. Outside in the cold, she stood next to a concrete planter full of dead plant stalks from last summer and breathed. The bags hung from her hands. The cold came back immediately, the way it always did when you stepped out of a warm place into a Fredericton January. She wasn't sure what she was feeling exactly. Grateful. Embarrassed. Something else she didn't have a word for yet. She started walking home. She'd made it about a block and a half when she heard boots on the snow behind her. That same squeak of packed ice. and Walter Greer appeared beside her again, his rye bread tucked under one arm. "You going this way?" he asked. "Priestman," she said. "I'm on Brunswick, I'll walk a bit." They walked. She expected him to say something about what had happened in the store, but he didn't. He talked about the winter instead. Said this was the coldest January he'd seen in about 8 years. Mentioned that the roads by the river were worse than the city roads. Asked if she had good boots. She looked down at her boots, which were technically hip waterproof but had a slow leak in the left one, that she'd been dealing with since November. "They're okay," she said. He didn't push it. After a while he asked whether she lived on Priestman long. She said 3 years. He said he'd lived on Brunswick for 22, had raised 2 daughters there, that his wife had passed 6 years ago, and he still found himself talking to her sometimes, when he was doing things around the house. Lena didn't know why she told him what she told him next. Maybe it was the cold, which made everything feel more stripped down. Maybe it was the soup and the 85 cents, and the fact that she was tired of holding things so tightly all the time. "My son asked me this morning if we could have soup," she said. That's what it was about, in the store. He asked for soup and I almost couldn't make it work. Walter walked beside her. He didn't say anything right away. "How old?" he asked. 7. He nodded. "What's his name?" "Noah." He said the name the way people say names when they're filing them somewhere they intend to keep. They reached the corner where Brunswick branched off and Walter stopped. "I'm going to say something," he said, "and I want you to hear it as a practical thing and not a charity thing, because I know there's a difference." Lena looked at him. "I do the books for a property management company on Queen Street. Fraserview Properties. They've been looking for someone for front desk and tenant coordination for 2 months now. It's full-time, benefits after 6 months, and they're not picky about experience as long as the person is organized and can deal with people well." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Plain white, his name on it, a phone number. "My daughter-in-law runs the office. Tell her Walter sent you." Lena took the card. It was a little bent at one corner, like it'd been in his pocket for a while. "I can't promise anything," Walter said, "but I can promise she'll take the call." "Why are you?" "Because I had a winter like yours once," he said. "Different circumstances, same feeling." He picked up his bread again and looked down Brunswick Street. "Boots," he added. "Get the left one looked at. Tape doesn't hold forever in this cold." And he walked away. Lena stood at the corner for a moment, the card in her gloved hand. The grocery bags hanging. The cold coming through the slow leak in her left boot exactly the way he'd somehow known it would. She walked home. She made soup for dinner. Noah sat at the table in his pajamas again. He changed into them immediately after school, every day, a habit she'd never tried to break. And he ate 2 full bowls and then looked up at her with the soup warmth still on his face and said, "This is really good, Mom." "It's just soup from a can," she said. "It's good though," he insisted. She let him believe it was more than it was. She put him to bed at 8:30 and sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, with the business card in front of her and the last of the decaf in her mug. And she turned the card over a few times without reading it again, because she'd already read it enough times to know what it said. She thought about the ways these things didn't work out. She'd thought about those ways so many times over the past year that she was very practiced at it. The job goes to someone else. The daughter-in-law doesn't take the call. Things don't work that way for people like her, in winters like this. She'd gotten very good at preparing herself for things not working. But she also thought about Noah asking for soup. Not asking for much, just soup, and the way he'd waited to see if she'd say yes. She looked at the card. In the morning after Noah left for school, she called the number. The woman who answered was named Deb, and when Lena said Walter had suggested she call, there was a small pause and then Deb said, "Walter Greer, from Brunswick Street?" And when Lena said yes, Deb said, "Come in Thursday. 11 o'clock, ask for me at the desk." The interview lasted 45 minutes. Lena wore the good blazer. She kept folded at the back of the closet for situations she wasn't sure would ever come. And she sat across from Deb Fraserview, who turned out to be a practical, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who asked direct questions and seemed to genuinely dislike small talk. And she answered everything as honestly as she could. She got the call on Friday. Same day as her pay from the laundromat. The job started the following Monday. It didn't fix everything at once. That's not how these things work. There were still hard months. A dental bill in March that set her back. A stretch in April when Noah had an ear infection and she missed 2 days of work and held her breath waiting to see if Deb would say anything. But the job was steady, and the people were decent. And by summer she had a small amount in her account that wasn't earmarked for anything, which was a feeling she hadn't had in so long. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like. She saw Walter once in September, at a fall market on the waterfront. He was buying apple cider from a farm stand, and he saw her across the crowd and raised the jug slightly in greeting. She walked over. Noah was beside her, eating a maple sugar candy on a stick, and he looked up at the older man with the gray beard and the flannel-lined jacket and waited to be introduced the way 7-year-olds wait, openly, without pretense. "This is Walter," Lena said. "He's a friend." Walter looked down at Noah. "You like hockey?" Noah considered this very carefully. "I like watching it," he said. "I'm not that fast yet." Walter nodded, as though this was a completely reasonable and respectable position on hockey. "That's how it starts," he said. They stood in the September sun for a few minutes, talking about nothing in particular. The river was visible beyond the market tents. The leaves were starting to turn at the edges, the first hints of red and gold coming into the trees along the bank. Lena watched Noah wander a step or two away to look at a display of honey jars, and she said quietly to Walter, "I never really thanked you properly." He waved a hand. "You didn't need to." "I did," she said. "I do." He looked out at the river for a moment. "My wife used to say that the point of having a good winter behind you is knowing how to recognize someone else who's in one." He shrugged, the way people shrug at things that are true and don't need ornament. She was usually right about that kind of thing. Lena didn't say anything to that. Some things don't need a response. She called Noah back from the honey jars before he could knock anything over, and they said goodbye to Walter, and they walked together along the waterfront. In the warm September afternoon, the maple candy finished now, Noah's hand swinging loosely at his side, and the river going on beside them the way it always had. Steady, unhurried, moving forward the way things do when you stop fighting so hard just to stay still.